If you listen in Parliament to how many times the word reform is mentioned, reform this, reform that, reform the other. Why? Because Britain needs reforming.
Elon Musk tweeted that he believes Reform UK are going to win.
If we don't win the next election and we don't break this tribal two-party structure, I think Britain could very quickly fall apart.
Do you think Sir Keir Starmer understands the problem of immigration in this country?
This is a matter of being transparent, and I don't think the governments have been transparent with the British people.
How do we turn Britain around?
If we don't start to get our act together, the world's going to say this place is a joke, and then suddenly what happens is they don't buy our debt, they don't fund our deficits, our currency starts to collapse, and then we have a real problem. On Southport, we were told by the Speaker at the beginning of Parliament we were not able to raise the Southport issue.
So we don't have free speech in Britain. What should be done about Islamism in Britain?
Some of the stuff that's happened, Winston, I mean, people just need to wake up.
Before you hear from Rupert Lowe, Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, remember, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press like, comment and subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Mr. Lowe discussing the issues that you want to hear about and that the mainstream media won't touch. But without further ado, Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe, MP, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with me. I know how busy you are, not just Reform MP, but you're a farmer, a football man, you run various businesses, and you are also unbelievably active on X. I've been enjoying your feed recently, and I think many people have. Thank you, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
There's much we've got to discuss. We met briefly on Whitehall during the farmers' protest after the budget. I want to talk about the assisted dying bill, which at the time of recording now, you're about to go out and vote, I believe, after this conversation. But last night, we heard ONS figures, and Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, came out to discuss the ONS figures of 906,000 net migrants. This is about 200,000 more, I believe, than the figure we previously thought. That's for the year ending June 2023. And he says that this is all because of the Conservatives, and he seems to have changed his tone, and he's going to be the one to crack down and sort this out. Do you think Sir Keir Starmer understands the problem of immigration in this country, and is he the man to sort out?
Well, you have to remember he's a human rights lawyer, and it's a bit like putting a fox in the chicken coop. I honestly don't think he is the man to be sorting this out. You've probably been seeing that we've been asking questions regularly, and we've been trying to get the information, the true information for the British public. Ultimately, I think this is a matter of being transparent, and I don't think the governments have been transparent with the British people. So we are drilling down, we are asking questions, and we are, I think, making it clear to the government that their job is to disclose the honest figures so the British people can make their own minds up about immigration. And you have to remember, it's not just illegal immigration, it's also legal immigration that we have to watch out for.
Yeah. And
when you talk about the net figure, you have to remember that that is the net figure. Some people have actually emigrated, and what we're tending, and some more people have come in, but the net figure is still a huge number. I mean, it's a city bigger than Bristol, in a year. And it's no wonder, and that's people we know about. I think there are a lot of people here who we don't know about. So, I'm not quite sure what the ruling elite's agenda is, but to me, it's mad to see your best people leaving. And I know for a fact they're accused of people trying to get into Monaco and Dubai and
the States,
and these
Israel,
and all the Italy, Greece. I've got friends who are going to Greece.
Go to Greece? I didn't know about that.
You can get a golden visa in Greece. And people, I think a lot of our most creative people are becoming very tired of all of the regulation and red tape and oppressive sort of state intervention, not to mention taxation. And as we know, just had huge tax rises on the private sector. So I think a lot of them look at this and they're going. They're literally leaving. And what we're then doing is replacing them with very often people who aren't necessarily going to be wealth creators and drivers and Labour bang on about working people. Well, before the election, they found it very difficult to define what a working person was. To me, a working person isn't just the person who works, it's the people who actually stimulate and create employment for the workers. You can't discount them as not being workers. And in any situation, I think, if you look at the Soviet Union, they destroyed the middle classes. And the middle classes are the aspirational class which you must have in any successful democratic sort of capitalist society. To crush aspiration is lethal. And I think that's what this Labour government are trying to do. They're trying to sort of create this divide between people who are wealth creators and wealth generators and people who work.
Yeah.
And, I run family businesses. I'm proud that, our family business, which my father, he died in November 22, he's left that to me. It's my responsibility.
Is this your farm?
It's huge. This is an electrical contracting business in Oxford. And people have worked for us for 50, 60 years. The business has been going for over 100 years, which is quite an achievement in any construction-related business. But, I'm proud. We've got people, they all know me. I think it's a big unit of a family unit in a way. And a lot of those people were my father's best friends. He worked with them all his life. And I think this is what's so worrying about these tax changes, is that it's almost by design they're trying to break the backbone of Britain. They're trying to destroy the continuity of our farms by forcing taxes on farmland, despite the fact that on numerous occasions Steve Reed, before the election, said there would be no change to APR. Well, there has been, so that was a barefaced lie. And whatever they say, farmers don't have vast amounts of cash, so the only way they can pay that tax is to sell land, and that's not what they ever want to do, because the land is the key to the family unit, it's the key to the community continuity. Same with family businesses, if you can keep them together. But they're going to be affected as well, because when somebody now dies, people will have to sell their businesses, and that breaks up the family unit, it breaks up the community. And we've then had Angela Rayner's, laws that she's brought in which increase the minimum wage. It does all sorts of protection rights for people who are in employment, such as, not being able to fire them from day one, no probation periods, all the sort of stuff that they're doing, which is swinging the balance in favour, too far in, I think, favour of the worker, and has not enough respect for the people who actually generate the wealth.
Yeah, the entrepreneurs, the aspirational.
It's a balance.
The creative.
It's a balance. Yeah. It's a bit like, a football club is a balance between the owners of the football club and the players, and that pendulum swings back and forth. This is a pendulum, I think, which is swinging far too much in favour now of people who actually turn up, work 9 to 5, get paid, and don't forget that these businesses collect VAT, pensions, national insurance, taxes which they gift wrap and pay to the state. They've weaponised our financial advisors against us, so your accountant or my accountant is petrified that they actually do our tax returns right. They've almost been turned into tax collectors. In my day when I first started, your advisor worked for you, you paid him, his job was to mitigate your tax. I would argue now that the HMRC have actually, and by the way, they're a law unto themselves. They need to be made more accountable, far more accountable, both to the government and to the people who pay the tax. So I think we've got a situation, Winston, where we're losing our best people.
Yeah.
And we are arguably, and there probably will be some good people coming in, but I don't think that the structures that we've got ensure that we get people who are going to come here who bring skills and who bring abilities and who bring benefits to our society. And this is why I'm pushing so hard to get the transparent data, so the British people, the people who've been paying their taxes all their lives, who live here and care about the country, they can actually see and judge for themselves the effects of this untargeted mass legal and illegal immigration.
Yeah. Well, it's those working people, it's the employed, let's say, rather than the employers, who end up hurting. When you strangle and suffocate the entrepreneurs and the aspirational and the business leaders, the economy hurts, and they'll have to sack people. The business is hurt. We've already saw last week, I think Vauxhall have announced they're closing their Luton factory. This presumably will keep on carrying on. This happened under the Tories, and this is just the turbocharged version of what has preceded Keir Starmer's government. A lot of the conversations on it, it's criticism, it's negative. So they shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that. I want to hear a positive vision. Like, how do we turn Britain around? If you are CEO of Britain, what are you going to do to be like, right, we've got to bring the best entrepreneurs back to Britain. We've got to bring the inventors back. We've got to bring the business leaders back. This is what's happening in America. This is what's happening in Dubai. This is what's happening in Israel. How do we get excited? How do we, obviously, we've got 1 million net migrants coming to Britain, but where are the best and brightest of the world? They should be coming here. How do we bring them? What's reforms vision?
Well, I think what's happening in America is fantastic. So we've actually seen, Trump and Musk and some sensible people, now going to be taking the helm there. They, I think, will change, and it's going to be very interesting to watch what happens there. I'm not sure it'll necessarily be good for global sort of prosperity in the short term, because trade barriers are never good for global prosperity. It'll be good for American prosperity. And I think to bring some sense to the federal government, which, as you know, is out of control since Roosevelt undermined the 9th and 10th Amendment of the Constitution. The Constitution, by the way, is one of the best documents that's ever been written by a group of people. Fantastic document. But it was undermined, so the federal government's grown like a weed. These guys now know what they're doing. So Trump, he's been in once. He had very few people ready to go the first time. He's got lots of people ready to go this time. He knows what he's doing. He's done it before. I think he's dedicated to changing the way in which America operates. And I think Musk, having done what he's done with X, it's fantastic. So we've got a free speech platform.
Yeah,
people can say what they think, and whatever people say, I love free speech. I think freedom of speech is the key to all of our freedoms. It's the key to the British Constitution. It's embedded in the Bill of Rights. It's embedded in that is a right of people in this country. So Elon Musk loves free speech. So free speech means people have active debate. They might get upset. They might be hurt, but at least you get at the truth. So you've got to have a society where people can say what they need to say. But in answer to your question, I just want to answer your question, because in Britain, America's gone that way, and using Musk's terms, Britain's gone full on trot, which it certainly does appear to have done. So the more I'm learning about the structure of Britain, and I blame both the Tories and Labour and the Lib Dems too. So we've had this, what I call tribal politics, but it's tribal politics within this House of Commons structure. So you've had a belief that it's either blue or it's red. And behind that, you've got the civil service, who are supposed, as Maggie said, advisors advise, but ministers decide. So what they're supposed to be doing, ministers are supposed to be holding civil servants to account. That's not been happening. So what's happened is Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, through legislation, they have basically created, terrible complications with the Equality Act and the Human Rights Act, the Bribery Act, all of the nonsense that Derry Irvine helped them to foist upon Britain, which has caused chaos. Irvine? He was the legal advisor to Blair. So basically that happened. Then we've had the Tories have done similar. I mean, Boris came in on a ticket. We gave Boris an 80-seat majority. He came in on a ticket of reducing immigration. Well, he didn't. He increased immigration. Yeah. So these people, the tribal politics means that they've got so used to being red or blue. So Blair then hollowed out the Labour Party. Cameron, who in my view had been a terrible sort of influence on the Tory party, he's hollowed out the Tory party MPs. So if you get weak MPs and a weak gene pool, those people can't and don't hold the civil service to account. And these are people, most of them, look at the front bench of the Labour Party. Out of 26 people, 3 of them have got what I would call questionable business experience. So they don't know their way around.
As in no business experience. As in they're the only ones who have a bit of business.
3 of them have got a little bit of business experience.
And none of the others.
I would argue it's pretty irrelevant, but 3 of them can argue they have been in business. Now, that's pretty shocking. So, I mean, business isn't everything, but it's quite an important part of generating wealth and employment and, as I say, nurturing these communities.
Well, if you can't run a business, how are you expected to run a country?
Very good question. Very good question. And you know, the one bit of good news I would say to you is I think Britain still has a bedrock of fantastic people. And I think increasingly they're getting frustrated by what's happening. They're very slow to react. But if you look at what's happening now with reform, this doesn't happen very often. You've actually got reform now beginning to poll over 20% on a regular basis. I think we were 22% in a poll yesterday. And I think that will go on. And I actually really believe that we can win the next election. And I will say to you, and I say to everybody who's listening, if we don't win the next election and we don't break this tribal two-party failing political structure, I think Britain could very quickly self-immolate and it will fall apart because I think the state's got far too big. All of those agencies are unaccountable. They're all staffed by people who are on final salary pensions. They take no risk. State pensions are bigger than private sector pensions. The balance between the private sector, which arguably should be the boss, and the state has got completely out of kilter. So the more I dig, Winston, and I said it the other day in an interview, the more I'm beginning to think that we're running a bit of a Ponzi scheme. And if we don't start to get our act together, the world's going to say this place is a joke. And then suddenly what happens is they don't buy our debt. They don't fund our deficits. Our currency starts to collapse. And then we have a real problem. So, and you know, they always say the definition of credit is suspicion asleep. So if people lend you money and they start to worry about you, they don't lend you any more, and then they want their money back. So I think we've got to be very careful as a country. I think we've enjoyed a hugely sort of privileged post-war position, along with the Anglo-Saxon world, who basically with the help of Russia won the war, and we've dominated not just European politics, but also global politics. That's changing. So, I mean, we're no longer the undisputed leaders of the world that we used to be. You've got emerging economies everywhere where you have got real capitalism, you have got improving standards of living, you have got people who believe in endeavor and believe in trade and creating wealth, and they're proud of what they achieve, they're proud of what they're doing. They don't give a damn about, you know, climate change. You know, China's still building coal-powered fire stations and shipping coal from northern China, building railways to take it down. And you know, you've got that they don't. India buying Russian oil, they don't care.
Yeah,
and they're the most populous. Indonesia, they're the most populous countries on earth. And here we are. We've got a bunch of sort of small-minded people obsessed with net zero.
Yeah.
But what they should do is start by dealing with the major issue. So let's get China sorted out. Let's get India sorted out. Let's get Indonesia sorted out. Let's start to actually change things there. Why would you want...
Wait, what do you mean change things?
Well, make sure they take a more responsible attitude before you start destroying your own economy in Britain, which is what we're going to do.
With net zero.
Which will then diminish our global influence. So if we have no economy and we're calling on tram tickets, nobody's going to take any notice of us.
So look, we've just zoomed through many topics, which I wanted to discuss with you, so including the bloated state,
the bloated state,
environmentalism. Elon Musk this morning tweeted that he believes Reform UK are going to win the next election.
Well, I just told you we're going to win it.
Yeah,
I believe it.
Elon apparently.
I got told I'd never win a seat. Well, we won a seat.
Yeah,
we got the bridgehead.
So
we're surging in Parliament. We're surging forward. I think people are watching what we're doing, and they're. You know, the public want transparent information. They want to be governed by people who care about the country. They don't want to be governed by little people pork barreling a living on the back of other people's hard work.
Yeah. So can we just pick apart a couple of these things that you've just mentioned there? So just back to free speech, because this is an important one. You mentioned the 1689 Bill of Rights. Just after the Glorious Revolution, just after...
One of the finest events in British history.
Agreed.
Glorious Revolution. I love it.
But that Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech there, it's for parliamentarians to be able to speak freely. And actually, if you look at free speech law today in Britain, I think we're only protected by Article 10 of the UN not the UN, the European Court of Human Rights Charter. And even that is not much of a protection. If you look at part 2 of that article, it's basically a long list of reasons why we don't have free speech.
Well, this is why free speech has been clipped by the Tony Blair legislation. So the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act is an absolute cancer in the bowel of Britain. It creates all sorts of arguments and criticisms, and people having their feelings hurt and all the rest of it. I mean, we all used to take free speech for granted. And, free speech...
Yeah, so there's a spirit of free speech in Britain.
There is a spirit of free speech.
But there isn't any more at all.
Even in Parliament, Winston. I mean, the other day on Southport, we were told by the Speaker at the beginning of Parliament, even though we have parliamentary privilege, we were not able to raise the Southport issue.
Do we have any understanding why that is?
We're waiting to find out. I mean, who knows where the truth lies? There's all sorts of sort of conspiracy theories circulating, which, if they come out and they're true, are going to be very damaging to a lot of people. So I hope there aren't not lots of nasty little vested interests that are trying to hide things from the British public, which should be made transparent.
Yeah, that's for sure. But on free speech then, given that the spirit of free speech has been betrayed in Britain, we've taken it for granted. I could take a long list of other reasons. Non-crime hate incidents is another just perfect example. This is not technically speech, but someone's just been booked because they were hanging soiled jeans in their back garden, and that was deemed a non-crime hate incident.
I saw that. That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, well, the child was investigated for calling another classmate a retard. So we don't have free speech in Britain. And, if we were ever respected in the world, and I do believe we were, we're not. We're a joke now. The Americans are laughing at us. And so on the issue of free speech, how exactly do we pull that back? If you were in power, you just said you love the American Constitution. Would you have some sort of free speech constitution here?
I think it's very difficult now to write a constitution. Our constitution actually worked incredibly well. And if you watch my speech at the Reform Party conference in September, until 1997, Britain knew who we were. We were at peace with ourselves. We had very little national debt, thanks to what Maggie Thatcher had done over a period of years. Immigration was under control, and pretty much people were able to say and do as they wanted. But the real problem started with the Blairite situation. So whether it was, to take an example, the Financial Services Market Act of 2000, that's destroyed our stock market. Our stock market is a joke. I was just reading today, Darwinism is actually exacting revenge on the regulators we heard Rachel Reeves saying that they were going to change regulating from regulating growth to regulating for risk to regulating to growth. Will you tell me? I asked her to define. How do you define regulating for growth? That's in my view it's an oxymoron. So you don't regulate for growth. You have to deregulate for growth. That's what creates growth. So the Financial Services Market Act, we've now got two of the most venal organisations, the FCA and the PRA. I've written many articles in the Telegraph and online about them. They're completely out of control. They cost about £750 million a year to run. All of the regulation through Financial Services Market Act and then through MiFID 1 and 2, which is, again, European regulation coming in. London used to be a fantastic stock market. It used to be bringing wealth to the country. It matched entrepreneurs with capital. What's happened is Europe has a different model. They didn't have an equity model. They had a debt-based model. So a lot of this regulation was based on debt regulation rather than equity regulation. So what they've done is they've closed London down. And if you listen very carefully, they're now saying they want to try and revive it. Well, as you know, if you've ever been in a market, and I was a director of LIFE, the London International Financial Futures Exchange, the key to any market succeeding is to get liquidity. Once you've got liquidity, it attracts other liquidity. Once it's got no liquidity, it's very difficult to get the liquidity to go there. And what these people have done, the FCA and the PRA, is because of the banking crisis in 2008 and because the small-minded politicians like George Osborne, they all thought the best thing they could do was be seen to bash bankers and bash the financial markets and give free rein to the FCA and the PRA. So the FCA is basically the retail-facing regulator. The PRA is more the wholesale, the insurance markets and others. They actually work together. So they've embedded Stonewall philosophy in our regulation. You know, there's a character there called Sheldon Mills who's a director of Stonewall. I mean, some of the stuff that's happened, Winston, I mean, people just need to wake up. A lot of it we don't need. It doesn't do anything. It's actually destroyed our markets. It's destroyed wealth. It's reduced London's position. A lot of people now raise their money in America. NASDAQ's grown like a weed. The New York Stock Exchange has grown like a weed. We've died. And this year, I think I saw £50 billion worth of British companies have been taken over because our market hasn't got the liquidity. Therefore, the valuations of our businesses are low. And therefore, predators come in and in a Darwinian way, they clean it out.
Yeah, just while we just saw our Prime Minister
while we
Larry Fink
overregulate and tie Gulliver down. You know, it's just extraordinary, really. And people have let this happen. And I think, in a way, I plead with the British people every day. I say to them, don't take this lying down. If you get some petty-minded bureaucrat bossing you around, stand up to them. They're your servant. They're not your master. The state is there to serve the people. It is not there to tell them how to live their lives. But, you know, we've now got to stand up to them. And the British people are so polite and so decent-minded and so community-minded that they take a very long time to react. But my message to people listening is don't take it anymore. You've got to stand up and you've got to, if you see something that's wrong, challenge, and keep challenging. And I'm in Parliament. I'm going to go on challenging, and I'm going to use the data. I want the statistics. I want the truth. I want transparency, so that those people in power can be held to account. So if what they're doing isn't working, the British people can then vote them out of power at the next election. But the problem is there's so much obfuscation. There's so much PR. Where does the truth lie? We just want transparent facts and data. And then you can make your own mind up. And I'm going to keep drilling down. I'm allowed 20 questions a day. They're getting 20 questions a day, and I want the answers to them. And I'm going to go on drilling, and I'm going to go on exposing just how ineffective our form of government is. And my message to the British people, you've got to elect somebody from outside the existing political establishment. They may not have all the answers. They may be a bit rough and ready. But if you want to be liberated, you need to cut your ties with the old two-party tribal system.
That's what's interesting about reform, is that you're attracting old Labour voters as much as you're attracting old Tory voters. So it does seem to be not so much a right-left thing, maybe an up-down.
Red wall seats, Winston. Yeah. We're going to wipe the ball with them next time, and all the coastal seats. So
I do want to come back to the sort of road to victory for reform, particularly as you say, if there is not change in 2029. Then Britain might be finished, though there's some evidence I think it might already be finished. But just one, I just want to stop our conversation on the civil service. You've talked about how Britain needs a Department of Government Efficiency like Elon is enforcing in America. You know, we can talk always about the problems or whatever that's going on, but talking positively, like, what does that look like? If you were to come in, let's say you were elected, right? I'm going to do a British Doge. How are you going to do this practically? Just practically speaking.
Okay, so what you have to do is and we can talk about what we need to do immigration-wise. That's relatively straightforward. But in terms of unlocking the potential of Britain, what you have to do, the first thing you have to do is get a list of all the quangos, right? So under the British Constitution, which we talked about, the primacy of Parliament should be what's the most important. So the MPs, who are the people's elected representatives, they should be omnipotent. They are there to represent their constituents, and they're there to do the best for the British people. What Blair did, and Brown, and Derry Irvine, as I said, is they undermined that constitution, and they basically empowered unelected quangos who then make decisions and undermine the sovereignty of Parliament. That's what's happened. And, you know, ultimately, so therein lies the key. So you've got to get a list of these quangos, and you've got to then basically, I want to be the chief quango smasher. I'm going to go and rip the quangos to bits. We don't need them. They play no function. and we need to then return power to Parliament. And once power's in Parliament, if people then in Parliament don't do a good job, they can be voted out of power.
Mm-hmm.
These quangos can never be voted out of power. They don't stand for election.
Yeah.
And they've undermined Britain.
Yeah.
So,
A really good example of-
quangos like the Health and Safety Executive, I just mentioned the FCA and the PRA. These are all quangos, basically. They all get huge pensions. They all live extremely well. The first thing they do is build their empire.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them, actually, in my view, don't have anything to do, so they look for things to do. And they're quite a convenient place for lots of sort of people like Keir Starmer and the Labour Party to hide behind. I mean, I've got an issue with, in Great Yarmouth, which I'm dealing with at the moment, which again looks to me like it's an example of all sorts of these sort of unelected quangos making bad decisions. But when I've found out the truth, I'll blow the gaff. But I think that's the first step is to basically liberate people from all this oppressive licensing, regulation, laws. I think we've got to look at every law, and unless there's a reason for it, repeal it. And let people. It's effectively like regulation. All you need to do is just base it on the old premise. You know what that is? Caveat emptor, which means basically buyer beware. Your responsibility if you do a deal is your responsibility. It's not a regulator's responsibility to meet it. If I do a deal with you and I handshake or whatever, I'm dealing with you.
Mm.
It's like I've always thought money should be privatized. You know why? Because the best judge of whether your money is safe is the person whose money it is.
Yeah.
And that's what used to happen in Britain when we were the most prosperous we've ever been. You had private money. So effectively you had private banks. And if the banker, he could spend his entire life building up a reputation, it disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
There was a run on the bank.
Yeah.
So actually, runs on banks are a good thing because they clean out, people who aren't arguably clever enough or bright enough to have their money, and they got it taken off them.
Mm.
So the sheep get shorn.
Mm.
So now we've got these, all these regulators trying to take care of, every single person in society, and it's just clogging up the pores of enterprise. So the answer to your question is we need a ruthless attack on quangos, on non-productive government.
Mm-hmm.
And when Rachel Reeves says, we've got to tax people more, no, you keep taxing the private sector into oblivion, and meanwhile you're running a public sector that, in my view, is a fraud.
Mm.
I look at the DWP, the answers I'm getting back. I think they're handing money out like confetti. I don't think there's any constraint at all or restraint. So you've got the taxpayers working their backsides off, paying vast amounts of cash, and the government spewing it out to the non-productive elements in society with absolutely, we've got 9 million people of working age not working. We've got
really?
Oh yeah, we've got all sorts of people on spurious benefits. We've got things like Motability. We've got all sorts, which account for something like 13% of new car registrations. We've got, honestly, the DWP, and I'm drilling down. I'm drilling hard in here because this is where I think there's a huge amount of government waste, and it's not right. It's not right. If you don't work, you don't deserve to be treated as if you're contributing to our society. Obviously, if there are real people who can't work for themselves, we should take care of them. And Britain's always been good at that. We've always had, in Victorian Britain, when we were at our most successful, we had the friendly societies. We always took care. And they were all voluntary. So they always took care of the people who needed taking care of. And I can't work out, Winston, whether we're this Ponzi scheme, which I think we might be starting to run, hopefully, as you said, hasn't gone too far, whether it's by design or whether it's by default. But it appears to me that the state does not have enough respect for the money that it's collecting from the taxpayers and is not as accountable to the taxpayer as the taxpayer is the state. So as I just said to you, they've weaponized our advisors. That HMRC is chasing everybody down. I've got examples in my own personal situation where there are grey areas where they come after. Meanwhile, the spigots are spewing money out, unchecked. The other side of the equation. Well, that's wrong. I don't mind paying tax if it's being well used. I can tell you what, it's not. There are far too many people involved. The state now accounts for about 46% of GDP. America is still much less than that, but it's gone up a lot. The state shouldn't be more than 25% of GDP. I mean, taken to its logical conclusion, the state should really be in charge of, law and order and defence. But law and order, again, that's another one. Our judiciary, in my view, has gone woke. I don't trust them. I think a lot of people in this country equally don't trust them. You never know what decision you're going to get. You've got all these, we're told we've got to abide by the rule of law, and yet we've got all these ridiculous laws that Tony Blair brought in, which give this, if you like, oxygen to a woke judiciary, which is completely out of touch with what I call proper Britain. So again, that needs to be dealt with.
How would you deal with that?
Well, again, I don't have all the answers. I mean, I think we've got to start with bits. So with immigration, we have to start. So, for instance, foreign criminals in our jails, they should be deported straight away.
Yeah.
Illegal immigrants we should go after them and we should deport them.
There are 1.2 million illegal.
Illegally.
There's 1.2 million.
Illegal means illegal. They're not supposed to be here.
Okay, but practically, this is something that I spoke with your colleague.
I think, Winston, there are a lot more than that. I mean, again...
Yeah, at least 1.2 million, let's say. There's reports of 1.2 million. Okay, let's go back to immigration.
You saw my scheme. I thought MPs who don't mind about all this illegal immigration there should be a scheme whereby they offer to have an illegal immigrant in their house, in their spare bedroom. Because they're planting them all over the British countryside. I think Altrincham was the latest place.
Yeah.
Suddenly, men of the fighting age are literally dumped in there. I gather some of them are getting, all sorts of healthcare benefits that the British people don't get.
This specific issue is causing unbelievable tension. Obviously, there was the August riots, but you remember Knowsley at the beginning of 2023. Those riots were almost a precursor to what happened in August 24, which is that you dump these people in poor working areas of Britain. And then when there's issues, like in the case of Knowsley, there was a man who was filmed making a pass at a 15-year-old local girl. The police do fuck all about it. And then the local people are angry and upset. And then you have riots.
I'm on record, Winston, saying, obviously violence is not something we should be condoning in any way. But I think people's concern is genuine and it's correct. I mean, they should have concerns. Just look at these latest figures yesterday. I mean, it's too many untargeted people coming into the country, both legally and illegally. But you've got to start with the illegal people, and you need to, I think, have a much tougher view. We need a charter. Again, I think probably I need to work on a charter of, where we need to deal with illegal immigration first. Dealing with legal immigration is much more difficult, but the first thing we should do is we should have basically a moratorium for 2 years while we deal with all this illegal immigration, and then we start to deal with legal migration. And as you know, parts of Europe that have experimented with almost unlimited immigration, if you take Sweden and you take Germany, they're beginning to regret what they did. So we should be learning.
Are paying.
We should be learning from that.
For people to be deported.
We should not be just opening our borders, and we shouldn't be treating our own taxpayers who are funding this country badly and basically putting them at the bottom of the queue. They should be at the top of the queue. They are the tax-paying public, the voting public. And they are the people who the government should be respecting. But I can tell you, when I asked a question, about universal credit in the House yesterday, or day before yesterday it was now, there was a Lib Dem behind me shaking his head.
What was the question?
I asked about, basically statistics. I was asking for, number of illegal migrants on universal credit.
Right.
And the Lib Dem behind me was shaking his head because I got an answer back saying that the minister at the DWP is looking at the feasibility of releasing suitable information. That was my question. So what does that mean? Yeah. I just said we want the transparent data.
Yeah.
What's the feasibility of suitable mean? That's what I raised in Parliament.
Yeah, that's a sentence means nothing to me.
Means nothing.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant.
So why is the Lib Dem shaking his head?
He was shaking his head behind me. Extraordinary. So does he not want transparent information in Parliament? Maybe not. Maybe not. Huh. So honestly, Parliament is a bizarre place. I mean, I thought it was going to be bad, but I have to tell you, it's worse than I thought it was going to be.
Really?
Yeah.
Sorry, but on illegal immigration, practically speaking, what would you do about the 1.2 minimum, let's say? So, for example, we have reports of illegal immigrants tearing up their passports before they arrive. So you might say, well, if they're a criminal and they've got dual citizenship, we send them back to where they came from. But if they don't have that, what do you do with them?
My view, if they arrive here, they get put in a detention centre. Now, what form that takes, they should not be allowed to roam freely across the country, bust into different parts of England and given spending money. And, because often in my old constituency in the West Midlands, hotels will suddenly be closed down. And the next thing is they'd be full of illegal migrants. And, that destroys communities. And rightly, people get upset about that. So you should detain them. And then you should basically send them back to where they came from, which we can do under the treaties. I mean, Australia has shown us the way to deal with it, and we have to have a zero tolerance policy to it. And that's why the Human Rights Act has to be repealed, because all of these, the woke judiciary, hide behind the Human Rights Act, which embeds within it the ECHR.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to start making common sense, logical decisions that you would make if you were running a business on how do you actually further your business.
Did you support the Rwanda bill?
Look, the Rwanda bill, I think it was a waste of money. I think they spent £750 million or whatever they spent on a scheme. But to just disband it, I think it was a deterrent, and I think any deterrent should be there. Because if you were an illegal migrant and you came here, you weren't quite sure whether, in the draw in the tombola, your number was come up, and instead of ending up in Britain on all the benefits that we give them, you might end up in Africa, in Rwanda.
So the principle you liked?
The principle I like, but I would just put these people in detention centres, and I would not make them as comfortable as we are. I would not be paying them loads of benefits. I would be basically processing them and sending them home. They've come here illegally. Logic says if you come here illegally, bit like, they argue that the people who tweet on Twitter have done it illegally and they send them to prison. But these are illegal migrants who are coming here illegally, and we're not. We're sending them in to damage the fabric of Britain. I don't like that.
And we're spending a lot of money to do so. We're spending $8 million a day.
Who's just been blitzed by Rachel Reeves in the biggest tax increase in history. That money's being wasted. So I don't agree with that. So we start with the criminals. So there's 10,500 foreign criminals. The data we're getting says...
Sorry, there's 1.2 million foreign criminals. If you're an illegal immigrant, you're a criminal.
There's 10,500 foreign criminals in our prisons.
Oh, okay, sorry, forgive me.
At the moment,
yeah.
Right? And the information we get back shows you that those criminals, when they're released, they have very, very high rates of reoffence. So why should, again, the British people be subjected to foreign criminals going into our prisons, blocking them up, so we let our own prisoners out early, which we've been doing, because we say we haven't got enough prison space. They're released, and then they perpetrate a crime on an honest, decent British person. Wrong. So what we have to do is start dealing with that. Deport them. If you come here, and you live here, and you commit a crime, you go back to where you came from. So don't commit crime. Don't come to Britain and expect to commit a crime and stay here, because you won't. Under my sort of common sense rule. So you start with that, and then you have to start dealing with the illegal migrants who are here. And if they've come here illegally, they should be deported. They should be sent home. And if they want to come here, apply legally. And then we need to get our own, immigration rules set up properly. And then if they apply legally, and we decide they're going to basically benefit this country and benefit the taxpayers in this country, then we'll accept them in and welcome them in. I don't think there's any country in the world that has more decent people than this country. And the British people are very tolerant. They're very used to seeing a lot of, people from different ethnic sort of bases here. Maybe in the past there was some racism, but I think now there's no racism in London. It's in my view, everybody accepts everybody for what they are.
I think that there's been quite a lot rise in racism, actually, and particularly anti-Semitism. And if you look at the figures, there's a huge rise in anti-Semitism. And the statistics suggest there's also been a rise in Islamophobia across the country. And I think if you look at the August riots, there's clearly as Islamophobia. Well, I don't like the term Islamophobia. Let's call it Muslimphobia, which is a term I accept. I don't accept Islamophobia.
But let's look at the reason for that, Winston. I mean, if you come here legally and we accept you, you've got to come here on the basis that you are going to integrate into our society and our culture and our libertarian ways of life, right? So, and there are people, who come here who do that and contribute, and they're very law-abiding and they're good people. But equally, I would say there are communities that don't come here with the intent of integrating. And I'm not prepared to tolerate, a dual legal system. We have to, if you come here, you live by our laws, you live by our culture, you speak our language, and you play a part in what we have here, which is pretty special.
Yeah, so no doubt you then will have been quite shocked yesterday in Parliament. I don't know if you were there, when Labour MP Tahrir Ali was calling for blasphemy laws in Britain.
Well, complete no-no for me, and I've tweeted about it, so absolutely no.
But did you see Sir Keir Starmer's response, which was that he didn't exactly say, no, we wouldn't be doing that. Rather, his concern was the rise of quote-unquote Islamophobia.
Well, I think Keir Starmer is acutely aware of the size of the Islamic vote. So I suspect he's being driven by that. And as you know, most of these, as I say, these what I think are, the two-party tribal politics, they're based on, today's polling. How am I going to win a few more votes today? They're not based on principle. So they're not principle-based. And I think that's probably the reason for his answer. But I know, and you know, that there are parts of this country where, whether it's Islamic or other cultures, they haven't integrated into our society, and we all know examples of it. So we can't allow that to happen. That has to change.
My biggest concern, looking at the state of Britain now, when it comes to this issue, is actually between British Muslims and British non-Muslims, and I'm concerned about that division increasing and increasing.
Yeah, well, I think,
I don't see it as much with other groups. It seems to me that seems to be the problem. After your colleague Nigel Farage came on the show, he talked about how reform were going to be including British Muslims into the reform project as a way of doing that. And this is something that, as a way of dealing with that division. And I'm curious about how that is. Why should British Muslims, if I hear someone like Tahrir Ali, it's like,
but we have a British Muslim who's a chairman. The chairman,
Zia Youssef, yes,
Zia Youssef, who's come here. I think he's second generation. I don't know exactly his history, but I think he's second generation. He's a very, very well turned out, very respectful person, and he's got concerns like the rest of us that there isn't enough integration. There's too much immigration. And, like anybody with any common sense, there has to be some structure which encourages people who want to do well here and come and live by our laws. But there has to also be safeguards to make sure we don't end up importing men of fighting age whose intentions we don't know.
Yeah.
So I think Nigel's right. I don't care about people's religion or their colour or whatever. If they come here and they want to make a contribution and they're here on merit, I like merit. Merit is the key. And I don't have any preconceived views that, you should be of any creed, culture, colour or whatever. I think the only overriding factor for me is merit. Yeah. If you're there on merit and you're more able than other people, you deserve to get the job.
Yeah. I've got an Iraqi friend who says there's a joke in the Arab world, which is that if you want to go somewhere and work, go to America. If you want to go somewhere and not work, go to Europe. And a brief interruption to the interview. If you want exclusive videos, exclusive content, and exclusive interviews, come over to our Substack at winstonmarshall.co.uk. But back to the interview. So on the topic of Islam, you just recently tweeted that you had spoken to MI5 and they informed you that 75% of extremism in Britain is Islamist and the other 25% is far-right extremism. Now, if you look at how many Islamist attacks versus far-right attacks there have been over the last 20 years, significantly more Islamist than far-right. By orders of magnitude, it seems like the MI5 are doing a much better job of thwarting far-right extremist behaviour. What should be done about Islamism in Britain? How do we end this? I mean, look, leaving aside Southport, we'll see what happens there. This year, I mean, there's examples every year. Earlier this year, Mike Freer, the Tory MP in North London, said he wasn't going to run again because he'd been threatened for his life by Islamists. Lindsay Hoyle, Speaker of the House, went against parliamentary protocol earlier this year because he felt that members of parliament were threatened. It seems like Islamism is a serious threat in this country. How do we deal with it?
Well, I think we should have a zero tolerance approach to it. And as I say, if people are going to behave like that, Winston, they shouldn't stay here.
What if they've been here 3 generations or 2 generations?
It doesn't matter. They can't behave like that. And I think we've got to have some balance between the way in which we treat people in this country who are British, who've got genuine concerns about what's happening to their country, and people who've come here. And as you know, that a lot of these communities now want Sharia law. They want all sorts.
We've got at least 85 Sharia courts, I believe, in Britain.
I know. Well, I don't think that's right. If you come here, you live by our laws. That's got to be a precondition of coming here. And we don't make that a precondition, in my view, enough. So, I don't have all the answers, but I think what we have to do is, like all these things, you have to start with the issue that's soluble, which is the illegal immigration. It's very straightforward. We have to deal with that. We have to stop all this, what I call untargeted legal immigration, which it appears to me is happening. We can't just sort of want to flatter the numbers by allowing people who are in the process of applying just to be mass approved, which is again what tends to happen, and then they claim that they've solved the problem. It's a bit like in the old days. You had Tony Blair. Again, he used to have a waiting list to go on a waiting list, so they were able to then use their spin doctors to say that NHS waiting lists had come down. Again, if you want another example of a failed institution, there it is, the NHS in one go. So there's so much that is so wrong, but I do have hope in that I think I've got belief in the British people. But I do think they've now got to stand up for themselves a bit. They can't just rely on a few Reform Party MPs leading the charge in Parliament and trying to get transparent information for them. If they agree with what we're doing, they need to stand up in their local communities and say, no, it's not good enough. We want that data. We want that information. We're the taxpayers. We're funding this. We're funding your salaries.
Yeah.
As I said in my speech, just reflect next time you bump into some sort of planning red tape or other local government sort of licensing or nonsense that they've foisted on us. Remember, you're paying their salaries, and you are the ones who are electing them. So just remember that, both when you pay your council tax and when you cast your vote.
Well, one of the problems they have in trying to get rid of whatever government is in power at the moment, obviously Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government, is that the other options are completely divided. So obviously the Tories and Reform are split, and so and that is how Labour came to power. Is that Reform split the vote?
I think we've got to answer that one. Labour were going to win anyway, because the Tories. Boris was a complete and utter disaster. Anyone who doesn't think that, with an 80-seat majority, he didn't do anything. He could have done a lot. There was a load of things that he could have done, which he didn't do. He actually did almost the opposite to what he said he was going to do. And everyone says, "Oh, poor Boris, it was COVID." Well, I don't buy that. So, the response to COVID was appalling, and we secured a debate on the MHRA in the chamber on the 12th of December. So hopefully we can open that one up as well, and we can scrutinise decisions that were made during that mad period of all of our lives. But I think with Reform and the Tories, I think they have to run together for the time being. And look, I think Kemi Badenoch has very noble intentions. I think she's going to try to do her best. But I've told her that the only way that she can be the unifying factor, which is going to effectively bring some common sense to Britain, is if she first of all sorts out the Tory party head office.
CCHQ.
Correct, which is a law unto itself. And secondly, she's got to sort out the MPs that are in Parliament, many of whom are the direct result of David Cameron's sort of selection policies, which in my view were totally flawed. They were based on quotas and not on merit. So she's got those two issues to sort out. If she can't sort those issues out, then arguably the oldest party in the country probably is going to struggle. And that's when reform is the only option for the sensible Tories, to the common sense Tories, not the far. We're called far right, right wing. We're not right wing. We're just common sense people. What's happened is the majority of government's gone way left. So in relation to them, they might call us far right. We're just common sense people who want to see the country flourish.
Yeah.
So what happens is the sensible Tories, as time elapses, will come over to reform, and then you have a clean vehicle from outside the existing establishment, which can hopefully reform the country. And that's why the reform name is such a powerful name. If you listen in Parliament to how many times the word reform is mentioned, not in terms of the party, just reform this, reform that, reform the other. Why? Because Britain needs reforming.
So there's a few topics we've skirted past that I do want to touch on. So we've briefly touched on net zero. The Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband.
Net zero, we've only very briefly touched on that. You know, I honestly, net zero, having studied geology, the world has heated up and cooled down way before man was even thought of. It's a very convenient place for people to hide. I can't disprove it, and they can't prove it. So it's a wonderful place for people to hide who want to tax you more, who want to create a very powerful position for themselves.
Well, Ed Miliband wants to bring in zero carbon electricity by 2030. This includes nuclear, but we know the story with nuclear and how much of a pain that is and how long and expensive it is to get up and running. Is this a good thing or damaging?
I mean, obviously, if we can get to the stage where we've got a cost-efficient renewable energy, great. But it's going to bankrupt the country, because ultimately our power is going to cost a hell of a lot more than other people's power, particularly, as I've just said to you, China, who's still burning coal and still building railways to take it down from northern China. So, I mean, I think with this, the British people need to just be aware that they're being brainwashed. This is an agenda which I don't think stacks up. I think there are more important things in the short term for reform to concentrate on. But obviously, if we're going to have a vibrant economy, we must have a sensibly priced power structure. And what Ed Miliband overlooks, and I've got some interests in battery storage and other things. What he's got to remember is that in order to actually deliver what he wants, the national grid's got to be upgraded at huge cost, and a lot of his numbers don't include that cost. So, you know, you've got a situation at the moment where we've got lots of infrastructure, but at night, because the grid can't distribute, the wind blows at night, they're paying wind farms to turn off. You've got the structures there. So the whole thing is at the moment, again, it runs too far ahead of itself. Nobody's actually got a proper structured plan, and I think it's too fragmented. So I think if you study your geology, you know, volcanoes, the proximity, solar flares, all the things they can have, they have huge amounts of influence on our climate. And we're actually, we're in a relatively, cool phase at the moment relative to where we have been. And, but I think we shouldn't pollute the planet. As I said to you earlier, India, China, Indonesia, plastics in the ocean's unforgivable. We should be making sure we stop that. That's a nonsense. And we should be doing as little as we can in terms of damaging the planet. And as a farmer, I love my farm, and I do everything I can. I no-till. I try and improve the structure of the soils. I try and ensure that I don't do things which are going to damage the River Colne that flows through my farm. It's my haven. I'm going to look after it better than any government can legislate. And we're infested with people from DEFRA and Natural England, who, many of whom, they can't keep their staff. They're young. They've never farmed. They don't really understand. I mean, it's the blind leading the blind. So I think with climate change, it's a wonderful place for people to hide who want to tax you more, who want to dictate how you should live your life. And you probably saw we did some questions on, air miles run up by Ed Miliband's department, and you'll be shocked to hear, or you won't be shocked to hear, that they've been flying around it, very liberally. And so it is a case, I'm afraid, Winston, of do as I say, not as I do, and that you will always find that.
Yeah. So you're about to go and vote on the assisted dying bill. You've been on quite a journey on this one, because you initially came out against the bill. And now you've done a poll in your constituency of Great Yarmouth. The poll shows that the people that you represent actually don't think the same as you. And so you've said that you're going to vote in.
I've actually don't think I've ever said what I think. I said I've got my views.
Oh, right. OK. Forgive me.
But I felt this is a free vote. It's a very, very emotive issue. And I felt a bit like I give my salary to charity each month, Great Yarmouth Charity. I give it to a Great Yarmouth Charity because I think I'm 67. I've worked all my life. I'm doing this vocationally to try and change the way in which we're governed. And even though I've got criticism for giving it away, because other MPs say we can't afford to, it's not fair. Well, there are people who are a lot richer than me in Parliament, and they don't give their salary away. So I again, hypocrisy. But on this one, I felt it was right to open it up to my constituents, and we've run quite an extensive poll of about 1,200 people, and we're about 75 in favour, 25 against. So I think that's, for me, that is democracy at work. On that bill, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen today. I think there's been an amendment put down. Do you
know what the amendment is?
I haven't read the amendment because I've been busy doing your podcast and various other stuff, but I hope it's about. I'll tell you what I do think. I think the bill, the private members bill, is a very good debate. It should be had. And I think what the poll tells you is the majority of people feel that if you're of sound mind and you decide you want to end your life, you should have the power to do that. Now, that's the principle. Where we've got to make sure we cover everything off, I think, is the debate was literally tabled for a 4-hour debate. And I think there were 120 MPs who put down to speak, which is not enough time. And a private members bill is never as well constructed as a proper bill, after a royal commission and all the studies and everything else. So I think the bill needs more debate. It was only a second reading anyway, so at the end of the day, I don't think this was going to be the definitive decision. So if there's an amendment that says, effectively, which is going to lead to more debate, more time, and a better structured bill, then that will be fantastic. But I think my constituents gave me a steer that most of them, and it's interesting enough, it's been replicated in another poll, I think it was in Manchester, which came out exactly the same as mine.
It seems like the nation would
So I think the nation supports the principle. But obviously, it's important. What we don't want, and you're probably too young to have ever seen a film called Logan's Run, which was a film we all saw with Michael York in it, where you got to the age of 35 and a red crystal started flashing in your palm and you got sent off and you got euthanized because you lived your useful life. And I think for me, the biggest danger here, obviously you're going to get some miscreant families where, they maybe want the money of their parents or whatever. But I think most families love their parents, and I don't think that's a big issue. The big issue for me is the state. We've talked about the state earlier. The state is the danger. So the state, if the cost of all of the care that we're seeing, an aging population, the baby boomers have gone through now, that we know they're going to run into trouble with the pension. It's a put and take. The pension, the public pension's a fraud. Really, it's a put and take scheme which they know they're not going to be able to fund properly. So what they're going to be doing is basically pushing up your age of retirement because they can't afford to fund all the people who are retiring. So I think we've got to watch the state. We don't want the state doing what they've arguably done in Canada, which is, you go into hospital for some minor ailment and you have a form shoved in front of you saying, do you want to sign this to end your life? So I think it needs debate. I think it needs very careful wording, and I think the safeguards have got to be in there to protect people, who don't have the mental capacity to make that decision, who don't, who may be making that decision, for the wrong reasons. I personally would like, if I decide, I've got, God forbid, some awful disease that I know is going to mean that I end my life in extremely uncomfortable and undignified circumstances. At the moment, you can't decide you want to end your life. And I think that's what people have voted for.
I think the best argument, and this is what I happen to agree with, against the bill is the slippery slope idea.
Yeah.
So, for example, when divorces were first brought into Britain, it was for compassionate reasons. Now, almost half of children are brought up in a home with separated parents. Abortion as well, initially for compassionate reasons. Now, I think we have something like 250,000 abortions a year in Britain. You might say, okay, well, this is for compassionate reasons. You've sort of made that case here. Is this not a slippery slope? That's exactly what we've seen in Canada. It's a slippery slope. It won't be long. If this bill is passed, it will not be long. I'm happy to predict it will not be long that we will have exactly like forms. People go in for minor things and they're going to have forms shoved in their face like you just described.
Well, again, people use the capital punishment issue as well. They say the majority of British people would probably vote for capital punishment, so why haven't we got capital punishment? But look, this is a private member's bill. I think it's stimulated a debate. I think what you say there is perfectly fair and needs to be thought about. And as I just said, if we're going to have this bill, there's got to be cast iron safeguards to make sure that we don't get this creep which you're talking about.
But everything we've discussed earlier in this conversation is cast iron safeguards mean nothing. Like, look at free speech, the cast iron safeguards of free speech. Well, actually, we don't have free speech in this country. There's loads of things we can't say. Even as we discussed,
no, we don't. We don't have free speech.
So cast iron safeguards is a nonsense because we just don't have them in Britain. So how on the one hand we have a conversation about how the folly of the country, and the other hand is like, well, as long as we have these safeguards, we can have such bills. It just doesn't add up to me.
Well, but then you could argue that a couple of bottles of Merlot and a shotgun could do the job. But I mean that's a pretty extreme way to have to do it if you decide that's what you want to do. So I think it should be. Yeah, but if it can be structured, it's a debate we should be having.
But if it's easier, a couple of glasses of Merlot and a shotgun.
No, not a couple of bottles, not glasses.
A couple of bottles. But
I think you need more than 2 glasses, probably.
But the point being, even that isn't that easy to do compared to, the state will have a lethal injection, whatever. Like, the state will look after it. Like, making it easier, that is precisely the slippery slope.
Well,
more people will commit suicide by this than they would otherwise.
Well, these are all points that are going to be debated today at length, and they're valid points. I actually think this is going to be incredibly, if there is a vote on the private members' bill rather than on the amendment, I think if there's a vote on the amendment and it's going to mean more discussion and more debate, people will support that. So, and I will support that. So I would vote in favour of the amendment. But if we have a vote on the current structure of the bill, I think it's going to be incredibly close. I actually think it's going to be very close. It could be the closest vote of this Parliament.
Oh, really? The last question I have on this specific issue is that you sort of doing a poll of your constituency, a referendum. On the one hand, yes, that's more democracy, but you're elected representative. Is this something you're going to be doing? You're going to poll your constituency on all things?
We don't have a free vote on everything, Winston. So I think this is exception, and we got a free vote. I think on issues where it's not a free vote, my job obviously is to vote in the way that I think reflects both national interests and my constituents' interests. And I've said to them, I've got a big job in London. A criticism of me is that I'm not in Great Yarmouth enough. Well, most of the causes of Great Yarmouth's problems are not based in Great Yarmouth. They're based in Westminster. So they're bad. It's bad and unfair decision-making in Westminster that has penalised communities like Great Yarmouth, which is a fantastic community. It is a proper bedrock of British community, and they're very good people. But they've been badly served. So we've got to get that right. So in answer to your question, and there are people who criticise me for doing this, and maybe it's because they they think they should be deciding and telling their constituents. No, I think with modern technology, true democracy should be that in a free vote like this, which is of great significance to so many people, I personally think the right thing is to be as democratic as possible. And I've run a poll, which is quite a significant poll. The numbers, had it been 50-50, it would have been more difficult, but it's pretty conclusive. I mean, at one time it was running 80-20, but we've ended up 75-25, which is still pretty conclusive.
Well, there's also I don't know if this is true, but actually some polls suggest that bringing back capital punishment in Britain, a majority of Britons would actually support that. Is that something you would, if your constituency said, yeah, we want capital punishment back, would you vote back for capital punishment?
Well, I used capital punishment as an example. I suspect the British public probably would support it. Again, that comes with huge issues, even bigger issues, arguably, than sort of ending your life out of your own choice. Because, as we know, there have been miscarriages of justice, and that would be a terrible thing for anybody to have to face. So, and it has happened. So that we're not debating that one. So I'm going to park that one, Winston, until it's on the roster.
The way things are going, well, not out of the question.
We haven't talked about football yet.
We haven't talked about football. We've covered many topics in this, and I think before coming to football, I think the one sort of question I still feel like I want some. Perhaps you've answered it, but the thing I'm most concerned about in Britain is how do we bring back the great people, to the entrepreneurs, this is what we talked about a little bit at the beginning of this conversation. How do we bring back the most brilliant people to this country? How we were once the nation that had the great inventors and all of this.
We've still got them. A lot of them are still here. Some have gone, as we said, and more are trying to go. 2,500 people trying to get into Monaco. That's not good for us. I mean, we're losing our best people. The answer to your question is, and I think we've seen an example of it in a smaller scale, is Ireland. So Ireland got themselves into big trouble, and they have been allowed to run a tax arbitrage, basically, as members of the EU. So their corporation tax rate is much lower than everywhere else in Europe, 15%, I think it is. And they have therefore become a focus for investment, because in the end, what you have to do to create wealth is you have to empower individuals, you have to clip the wings of the state, you have to cut taxes, and you have to allow people to make decisions, take risk, and actually reward them for it. And if they take risk and win, they should keep the rewards of that risk. Okay, the state gets some. And there are many models, that the Laffer curve shows you this, where actually states that adopt that libertarian tax cutting sort of admin cutting agenda, they actually collect more tax, because you actually then you get new company formation, you get, as you say, technological development, you get entrepreneurial sort of drivers. And I'm a great believer, if you have a skill base and you have an entrepreneurial sort of growth in a growth market, you actually, by doing that, you create other opportunities. So very rarely can a man sit down with a blank sheet of paper and say, I'm going to innovate here.
Yeah.
Usually they don't think like that. What happens is, in the act of doing something means that you see an opportunity, another opportunity, and another opportunity, and then another opportunity. It's a bit like a chain reaction. So the answer to your question is, cut the state back to a sensible size and make it perform its function, which should be serving, not dictating. Get rid of all the quangos and all of the noise and all of the licensing and all of the what I call obfuscation, the needless regulation. Allow people to interface with each other, because people find their own level far better when they're allowed to than the state intervenes to distort those relationships. And then you cut taxes. So, I mean, my view, and we had this debate when we wrote the contract with the people, as we call it, and I did the business, the agriculture and some of the fisheries for reform policy, which is a great policy document. If you haven't read it,
I have read it, yeah.
You should read it. my view was, I think we ended up with and again, we to some extent debated this. I think our corporation tax rate in there was too high. I would have cut it to 12%. I'd have made it the lowest in Europe. So in answer to your question, what we need to do is incentivize people to take risk. Now, the way entrepreneurs work is you've got your money, you have the idea, you take the risk. If you get the prediction wrong, you lose your money.
Mm.
If you get it right, you make lots of money.
Mm.
So the state can't actually lose, but what it needs is people who are taking risk. Because when you win and you employ lots of people and they all pay tax and then you pay corporation tax on the profits you make, they win again.
Mm.
The people who lose their money are arguably lubricating the capitalist process, because their penalty for getting it wrong is they lose their money.
Mm.
As you know now, George Osborne's made it very difficult for you to offset other income against losses you make, because there's all sorts of, nasty little riders and catchers, so that, those people who take risk, if they lose, it's very difficult to often offset those losses.
Yeah.
Again, you should be easily able to offset those losses. As Thomas Jefferson, I think, said, taxes should be totally transparent. And that way everybody can see how much the state's collecting and how much the state is spending.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, release the individual. And we've got the best individuals in this country. At the moment, we're losing a lot of them. Mm. And the reason we've got them is because Europe always used to persecute the Protestants and the Jews, very often the trades. It's a bit sort of old Europe used to think sort of, the trade was a dirty word, a bit like, British public schools created that here. Before, Waterloo was our golden era. Trade was fine. But by 1850, you had all these sort of schools that taught you professions are good and trade is bad. And, so Corelli Barnett's written a great book on it, saying that actually the public schools are the reason for the demise of Britain, because we got rid of the proper people in trade. Mm. But anyway, so I think we have the best people. A lot of the Jewish people fled France, they fled Germany, they fled. A lot of Protestants fled Germany. Some of my forebears were came to, and were in the Midlands. They were shoemakers, cobblers. They were called Hewin's shoes. And you got some. That was good immigration, because they were really able people, and they set up businesses, they took risk, they created wealth, and they came here and they integrated. That's what we want.
Mm. You mentioned the Laffer curve there. We're going to have a serious schooling in the Laffer curve, I believe, in the next 5 years. Hopefully, not so damaging that
it's going to be the reverse Laffer curve, I fear.
Yeah. So football, your beloved Southampton, for whom you were chairman, are bottom of the league.
Bit of a worry.
Can this be turned around?
Well, as I said to you in our sort of pre-match warm-up, the being bottom of the table at Christmas is usually the harbinger of relegation. That's the sort of common theme. But when I became chairman of Southampton Leisure Holdings, and we basically did a reverse takeover, but I was going to build the stadium, which we did. And I was a relatively competitive hockey player. So the old chairman, who was a wonderful man called Guy Askin, who I think is still alive, when we were bottom after Christmas, I think it was in 97 or something.
Letitia,
he came to me. Letitia he's a very good friend of mine, Matt Letitia.
Oh, yeah.
Guy came to me, he said, "We're going down. You need to be chairman of both the holding company and the football club." So I said, "Well, fine, Guy." I had no idea. I thought it was a game, not a religion. It's a religion. Football's a religion.
Of course.
So I said, fine. So I was appointed chairman. I think we'd played 31 games and we had 27 points and we were bottom of the league. So we had 7 games left to play. And so unusually for football, I was used to changing rooms because I used to play relatively competitive hockey. I played hockey till I was 57. So I started going into the changing room, which got shock horror. It never happened in Southampton's history. So, for the last 7 games, I went in and they all thought, what the hell's the chairman doing coming into the changing room? But, I said, I'm coming in, and if you don't play well, I'm going to bloody well tell you. And
who was manager then?
And then it was Graham Souness.
How did he like you coming into
well,
the change room?
he and I think his comment has gone down in history. He said, "What's a man with a name like Rupert doing in football?" so anyway, I held him to account because we were a public company. He didn't like that very much, and he's a very it's water under the bridge. But would I ever have him as either? And I don't call them managers; I call them head coaches because most of them can't manage anything. But he would I have him ever working any business with me? No, but that's fine. So anyway, we basically out of the last 7 games, so we ended up with I think 41 points. So we got 14 points from the last 7 games, and we stayed up. Wow. I remember there was a game at Roker Park. I think it was the last game at Roker Park, Sunderland. And we won that game 1-0. I promise you, we scored a goal after about 20 minutes. And then a Waddle was playing, actually. Huh. Their crosses were coming in. They hit the post. They hit the bar. It was a muddy evening at Roker Park. Anyway, we won 1-0 and we got 3 points. That was the beginning of our campaign. And we stayed up. I think Middlesbrough went down that year. So then Souness resigned. McMenemy resigned. You know, I was on the back page of every newspaper, every tabloid, because they didn't know who I was, with a sort of border saying Southampton crisis around it. So I shut the phones off, interviewed all these people I'd heard of, you know, Bobby Gould and you know, all the people, who else did I interview? Joe Royle, people like that. Anyway, I decided they weren't right. So I hired Dave Jones, who'd knocked us out of the cup. He was at Stockport. So shock horror. We hired somebody who they'd never heard of, and, you know, got a chairman they'd never heard of, and they thought, you know, who knew nothing about football. And it's interesting. So Dave came in, and I like Dave. He's a very good man, and we got into terrible trouble. It's a different story for another podcast. Yeah. But, you know, again, the Crown Prosecution Service was at the heart of it. They behaved very badly, and they messed up his life. They made my life very difficult, and as a result of that, you know, I fought 2 libel trials because I was libeled by various papers. We can go into that another time. Anyway, you'll love this. So after 10 games, we had 1 point. And the joke going around the supporters was, what's the difference between Southampton and a cocktail stick? The answer to which is a cocktail stick's got 2 points. Anyway, the fans were chanting at me. You know, I remember we played West Ham. It all turned around. We played West Ham after about, I don't know, after maybe 11 or 12 games at home. And I had Sir Christopher Bland with me, who was chairman of the BBC, and literally the programmes were hitting us and the punters were chucking stuff. They were hurling abuse, chanting Rupert Lowe's a wanker and all sorts of other stuff. I told my wife it wasn't true, by the way. Anyway, so we beat West Ham, and then we went on the most incredible run, including winning at Anfield, which we hadn't done for 35 years. Mm-hmm. And we ended up that year, for you know, very unlike Southampton, we had a relatively smooth coast in. I think we finished about 12th or 13th or something. So then one thing went to another. I set up the academy. The only way we could compete with the big clubs, and none of them were doing it then, was to...
United were doing it then?
Not a proper... Well, they had their academy, but it wasn't done the way I did it. So they were lucky. They got a crop of players, and you tend to find if you get a crop of good players, they feed off each other. And you get this one-touch football because they've all trained together for so long. So I hired, you know, procurement. Then I hired Hugh Jennings to do the education, the structure. We bought a lodge in Southampton because I never think you can win anything unless you've got good people playing. So we tried to turn these people into responsible people. And we ended up scouting, you know, people like Theo Walcott, Gareth Bale. We had Oxlade-Chamberlain. We had Andrew Sermon, who, if he'd had more pace, was probably the most intelligent. We screened them for intelligence and athleticism, which you can't. God either gives you that or you don't have it. And then you can train them the rest. How do you screen them for intelligence? They're just psychometric testing and that sort of thing. So you can sort of work it out from psychometric testing and athletics. Obviously, Walcott could do 100 meters in nearly just over 10 seconds. Funny enough, a little boy called Nathan Dyer was a bit quicker than him, but you tended to find that these guys come from unfortunately, both broken homes and very difficult sort of upbringings. And as soon as they start to get a bit of money, that's when you end up with the problems, because they're not used to having money and cars and adulation and all the sort of things that can
so young as well
undermine people. So that's why you have to try and create a structure around them which protects them as much as you can.
And you did that? We
tried to do that. Yeah, I don't think they've got the lodge anymore, but we had a wonderful woman called Julia Upson who used to run it. She was fantastic, and they'd all go in there, and it was an 8-year program, because you started under 8, and then you bring in these people and you coach them. I brought a coach in from Marseille, a French coach, because the French actually have a much better structure than us. To start with, chairman, what are you doing bringing a frog in, all this sort of stuff? So I said, because he's better than you. So ultimately, he became accepted as a fantastic guy, which he was. And he loved the English, because he said the English have a much more heart than the French. They're stronger, they're lion hearts. And if you train them properly, and again, I actually do believe England could win the World Cup every 4 years if we had a better structure of training. But there are so many negative influences in football, and there's so much, if you like, incentive to drive transfer fees and buying success rather than coaching success. The whole structure of our industry is designed to do that. And by the way, I'm getting fired up to oppose this new football regulator, which is being talked about, who I think will probably do the same to football as the FCA and the PRA have done to our financial markets.
What are they proposing?
Well, they're bringing in a football regulator. It actually was started by the Tories.
Financial regulations?
No, football regulator, just football, to regulate football clubs. It's bonkers.
But what will they be regulating?
Well, they'll be regulating
how many goals
of
you
things,
can score.
Who owns clubs, who runs clubs. They're going to license everything. They're a bit like the FCA, control everything. And in the end, what they will do, and again, I went to a meeting. There were about 28 MPs there, and they all think that they know the answers. It's the most extraordinary thing. I said to them, well, where were all of you when the Premier League was founded and it's built itself up into the most successful league in the world? None of you were anywhere to be seen. So why do you think now you should all get involved in telling people how to run their football club? We've got the best league in the world. The last thing you want to do is damage that.
What do you think the balance is?
And they say, well, we need more fan representative. I said, no. Fans are supporters of the clubs, and they're fantastic. But don't put them in the boardroom, because the boardroom has to have a cold-headed decision-making process. The fans are there to emotionally follow the football club. They're customers of the football club, and they love the football club. It's their religion. But I said most problems you get in football come from fans making emotional decisions on the board, which end up with financial issues which then undermine the football club. And a football club is a community asset. It's really there.
Yeah, so that's what I want to go, because there's a little bit of a contradiction in, well, if you think it is a community asset, which I do.
It's a community asset.
And so how do you represent the community within the business?
Well, we did. So we built the stadium, and within the stadium we built sort of all sorts of facilities for young people to help young people. Because the most important thing is a football club is about networking in the community. So you need your young people. If you get somebody who goes to a match with his dad or his mum at the age of 7, they will always love that club. It's a key age. So before 7, get them going. And it's fantastic. And now we've got women's football. Women love the community aspect. They love being in a stadium there. And now once they understand the game, and the rise of women's football is great for the Premier League.
You watch women's football?
I don't watch it, but I mean, I applaud them for playing it. It's a bit like I don't watch women's golf or women's rugby, but I applaud their right to do it. Will I pay to watch it? No.
Just as good as normal football. So you don't like the German model then?
Do I watch women's tennis? Not a lot.
But
I play a lot of tennis, and I love tennis. But I applaud the fact they play.
Why don't you watch it?
I do watch it if I'm watching Wimbledon and women's tennis is on, but it's just not as, for me, first of all, they don't play as long, they don't play as aggressively, they don't play as powerfully, they're not as athletic. So, but it's come on a lot, as has men's tennis. If you watch the Jan Kodesh winning Wimbledon in whatever it was, 1973, I sort of think to myself often, well, maybe I could beat him now.
Yeah.
But, it's different rackets, different training, the whole thing was different.
I mean, when it comes to football, women don't even watch women's football, so it's hard for.
But if I'm being honest, no, I don't.
Yeah, So, but back to ownership. Sorry, I know we've been speaking a long time, but do you not like the German model where they have? Is it like 49% owned by the fans? Have I got that right? So that they are represented on the board. There is a fan representation in the business dealings, and if you look, they actually get results.
I don't mind fans being represented on the board. But what they can't be is involved necessarily in the financial decisions, because what you find, and the biggest pressure on a board, is the fans wanting you to spend money you haven't got. And when you undermine the financial base of your club, it can disappear forever. And some clubs have. So, there are various examples. Bury was an example. I don't actually know what happened at Chester, but Chester, I think, has disappeared. And you do get clubs that disappear. So I think for me, I tried to run the club so that we didn't either make or lose too much, but we always had a football club there for the next generation of footballers and the next generation of supporters. And the supporters, they're to be applauded. I think the British football supporters are the best in the world. The Germans are fantastically structured, and you go to a German club, you don't tend to get the sort of what I call Anglo-Saxon ire at the board, and I used to find when I was in football that the fans tended to leave me alone when we were doing well, and when we were doing bad, it was always my fault. So, because the last thing they wanted to do is criticise the players, but they needed to vent their frustrations on somebody. So it usually was the board. So football was incredibly stressful, actually, Winston. I mean, it's incredibly stressful. But probably the best day of my life was when we got to the cup final in 2003. We lost 1-0 to Arsenal, but it was at Cardiff. It was a great day out. Fantastic.
Will any of those old players be voting for reform? Theo Walcott, Gareth Bale?
I have no idea.
Names.
I think Matt Le Tissier could. I mean, he and I talk to each other.
If you can't get Le Tissier, you haven't got a chance to get the rest.
He's a great guy. I've been on his podcast actually on Rumble. I did a long podcast with him on Rumble, and I like him very much. He's a very good man.
Great. Well, Rupert Lowe MP, thank you so much. We've spoken at length there. I appreciate your time. I know it's incredibly precious. I hope we can have you on again. There's more to discuss.
I touched on a couple of areas we can go into in great depth again.
I would love that.
Not now.
Thank you so much, and all the best this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me on, and it's been fun. So let's see. We'll see what the result is. Probably lots of opprobrium, and
I'm sure. Rupert Lowe, a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for watching the Winston Marshall Show with Rupert Lowe. If you enjoyed that, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press like, comment, and subscribe. If you press subscribe, I can have more phenomenal guests like Rupert discussing the issues that you want to hear about and that the mainstream media won't touch. But until next time, be well.